Greetings, and welcome to the Modern Alchemist channel. I'm Aubrey Forrest, the Modern Alchemist, and this is Ask an Alchemist. 666777 asks, Hi Aubrey, how do we go from Saturn being our planetary incubator and life giver, something rather nurturing, to it being a black associated satanic force linked to temptation on the tree? It seems to shift its meaning to us after the cosmic event. Why use our mother star as a symbol of severity when it must have been so merciful at the time? This is a very good question, and one that I've encountered in one form or another over the years. The answer to this question is rather simple, but offers some complexity to the overall context of our human experience. So that everyone else understands the context of this question, we'll refer to the Tree of Life as presented in Kabbalah. Saturn gains its association to darkness, motherhood, and severity by correspondence to the sphere Binah as a planetary influence that presides within that sphere. As such, Saturn, through Binah, rules the black pillar called severity by virtue of Geburah, over which Saturn Binah has precedence. So the overarching question is, why is the Tree of Life within Kabbalah designed as it is? Because this is the root, core, and source of your dilemma. Before we commence, it is important to clarify that any use of the names Lucifer, Satan, Adam, Eve, God, or Jesus is for the purpose of explaining these concepts in the mythological terms they have been given and/or assigned. Any discussion here is not intended to promote or demote any particular religion, sect, or creed. We good? Good. Let's begin.
Shall we begin? Let's begin now. Let's begin now.
With regard to your questions and observations, there's a lot that can be unpacked. So that we don't overlook any opportunity to explore some ideas in full, let's break your question down a bit further. For clarity and convenience, I'm going to rephrase some of this into what I believe was the core inquiry and break it down into smaller segments. Question 1. How is being a creator God also associated with Satan and/or temptation? As part of this question, I'd like to take a moment later and explore a topic of some importance associated with temptation, that being who was the original tempter in the garden, and what was the nature of that temptation. Doing this will further cement our understanding of the identity, function, and mythological role the tempter in question supplied. Question 2. Why use our mother star as a symbol of severity when it must have been so merciful at the time? With regard to Saturn possibly being merciful at one time, it is important to keep in mind that Saturn has ever remained the same, regardless of the mythology spoken or role taken. Any feelings of warmth or benevolence from Saturn is pure projection on our part. That having been said, let's hit the last question first. Before discussing anything else, let's talk about the word severe. This word has come to mean cruel in the minds of many, but this is far from the case. Those on the receiving end of severity may think their treatment cruel, but the truth is that their treatment is only in consequence of their action and choices. To be severe is synonymous with being harsh or strict, but never cruel. Severity is merciless, but severity is not without compassion. We'll discuss mercy and compassion in a few moments. With severity, things simply are. The sun is hot, the snow is cold, the wind is biting. In each case, the example is severe, but never cruel. Objectively, they simply are. And so it should be for all things that come from that which is. We are, You are, I am, and the great I am is the Creator God, the source of all materiality, the ether, which in Kabbalah is assigned the sphere of Binah, which by virtue of the principle of correspondence is Saturn upon the tree. As part of our discussion on severity, it is imperative that we do not confuse mercy with compassion. They are entirely different in every aspect and respect. For one to have compassion, one must have sympathetic pity and concern for the suffering and or misfortunes of others. That's all. The word compassion is a fusion of two words, com meaning with or together, and passion meaning a strongly, barely controllable emotion. A passion is also a series or sequence of extraordinary events leading to the death or transformation of the individual involved, as in the Passion of Jesus Christ. To have compassion, one shares in the experience because one has endured similar things themselves. Compassion, by virtue of its prefix, means that this is something that is done with another. It is a shared experience, which gives a kind of shared consciousness. But compassion does not require action of any sort. With compassion, one need only acknowledge the suffering of another in sympathetic pity. Pity being the key word here. "Oh, what a shame," says someone with compassion. Or, "I feel your pain," is another way it is so observed. But at no time is any other action required. With compassion, it's the thought that counts, or so it would seem. In truth, its sedentary unresponsiveness is yet another testament as to its origin, Saturn, and her intractable nature. Mercy, on the other hand, is another matter entirely. Mercy does not require sympathy, nor does it require compassion. All that is required is that a person with power to act in behalf of another does so. Mercy is bound by absolutely nothing, save justice. In this it is agreed that mercy cannot rob justice, and so if a debt is to be paid, then it must be drawn from somewhere or someone. It's the willingness to act, and in so doing rescue another from a certain fate, that demonstrates that mercy embodies the true traits of unconditional love, whereas this is not seen on the side of compassion. By its very definition, compassion requires that something is shared, and if this experience is not shared, there is no compassion given. Because we reside amid these 2 points of view in the middle pillar, it is we who can be moved by compassion to commit an act of true love and mercy. And it is we who in an act of mercy may share the burden of the suffering with another, and thereby earn the gift that compassion brings. Now that we've talked about the difference between compassion and mercy, let's talk about something else we all share together: temptation. Before we begin, it is very important to realize that there are 2 forms of temptation and 2 separate embodiments of those temptations. One tempts the flesh, the other tests the spirit. And to understand the difference between the two, one must understand the position between action and understanding. To begin, Satan and Lucifer are entirely different mythological and astrotheological entities. The term devil is actually a contraction of the words God of evil, which could then be applied to either side in principle, depending upon which pillar one happens to be standing. If the devil is seen as the ruler of hell, which is the underworld, then its function of ruler of the underworld assigns him a Saturnian designation with the other gods of the underworld like Osiris, Hades, and the Norse goddess Hela. We'll cover this more when we discuss creator gods and gods of death. As for Satan and Lucifer, the key to discerning the difference is contained in their names. Satan comes from the Hebrew shaitan, which means personal adversary. Once more, to understand who is opposed to whom or what, it is necessary to recognize from whence you happen to be standing and observing. Traditionally, the axiom goes, "The spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak." This perspective can be drawn primarily by standing upon the middle pillar and objectively evaluating the effect the other two pillars may have upon you as you stand in the center. Ironically, the evaluation of the flesh being weak is but wishful thinking. Its weakness is a strength that overpowers and foils most of those in pursuit of a spiritual life. This is because it is the flesh that feels, the flesh that yearns, the flesh that lusts and desires. In their most elemental form, our physical temptations may be said to reside within the lower three chakras of the human body. Here, these energies are that of hunger, sex, and conquest. It's these three that form Leviathan, the great beast that can never be conquered, only subdued. And yet, none of this can be seen as truly evil on their own. They merely are one's baser impulses, but they are, without a doubt, essential to existence. It is when they are out of balance with the rest of one's energies that one's consciousness is impaired and one loses perspective. We stand amid all of this physical input, and frankly, it's a wonder we can think at all. We embody two conflicting forces that are forever in opposition to each other. We are that living soul standing in the middle pillar, attempting to negotiate a truce between our Father Spirit and our Mother Flesh. Understanding this principle lends light to the idea that the creator of the flesh would then be the architect of every physical temptation, and thereby the Lord of temptation relative to the flesh, knowing every vice and flaw that was engineered in the creation of the individual in question. Lucifer, on the other hand, offers no such temptation relative to the flesh. Instead, the temptations offered by Lucifer are those resulting from illumination. Lucifer meaning the bearer of light. Lucifer's role as a light bearer also means that it is inherently disruptive to any system that is seen to be static or stable. Any Saturnian system, in other words, that is rigid, ordered, and strict would be considered in direct opposition to a Luciferian influence. Where many go wrong is forgetting that Lucifer is not the light, but only its bearer. As such, all those who bear the light also cast a shadow. So while some things are seen and revealed, other things are concealed or de-emphasized in the shadow cast by the light bearer. This is precisely the case in the Garden of Eden, where Lucifer as the serpent, not Satan, offered nothing prurient or sexual in nature to Eve, in spite of all that has been claimed against Eve's virtues over the centuries. His observation and temptation was purely esoteric, meaning that it was to grant dominion from within when the substance of the fruit was consumed. As such, Adam and Eve were promised that they would be like gods, understanding and knowing good and evil. It was a promise to stand upon the middle pillar and be able to use both hands in the operation of their will. And while the serpent denies that death will result from the consumption of the fruit, this perspective will be made clear when the serpent is considered in the role of a destroyer god rather than mere tempter. What the serpent emphasizes is that Adam and Eve were less, and that they could be more, that it didn't have to be like this. This knowledge served more as revelation to Adam and Eve than temptation, exposing that more could be had if they consumed the fruit. This is the reason why the fall of Adam and Eve is seen as a transgression rather than a sin, because the role the serpent played in the garden was as a revelator of truth. Everything else that followed was the result of the principle of cause and effect at play within a system where the result could be predetermined. The serpent in this role is that of a destroyer, not a deceiver, for it wrecks the Garden of Eden by causing its caretakers to be expelled, leaving the garden to be untended yet again, and leaving its caretakers naked and alone. Traditionally, it is taught that the serpent lied because he states that death will not be the result of eating the fruit. But this is because of the serpent's unique perspective on life and death as a component of the cycle of destruction which it embodies. The role of Lucifer as deceiver is a product of its nature as a bearer of light. If a thing is the light, it can only shine, and there is no restraint upon the light. It shines as it shines. A bearer of light has the power to contain and control how much light is actually shown, how it is used, and what it reveals or conceals. By the very nature of this power, deception is implied because one's perception is being controlled by the one holding the light. Now let's talk about creator gods and gods of death. Before we dig in, let's clarify one idea a bit further, that there is a big difference between a god of destruction and a god of death. Destruction may lead to death, but ultimately all a destroyer god may do is wreck a system in favor of the new system that rises from the ashes of the destruction. It is in this that gods like Shiva are seen as both a god of destruction and creation. From the standpoint of a destroyer god, nothing dies. It merely progresses into its new changed form or state. So, the eggs used in a cake are still eggs in principle, but in form and function, they are the descendant incarnations of their former state, following act after act of destruction. It is for this reason that the serpent declares to Eve in the garden that she will not die, because to the serpent there is no such thing as death, only destruction and renewal, one incarnation following another. So where death means that something has a definitive end, destruction means that one thing has changed and a new thing is born from the ashes of the thing that was changed. In the mind of a destroyer god, there is always a line of connection that can be drawn from one incarnation to another. Creator gods, on the other hand, are intractably tied to gods of death, and here's how. The moment that a creator god draws upon the response of the fabric of the ether that has been stimulated by the inflow of spirit and allows it to take form as a living soul, that soul's essence is defined by both its beginning and its end, both of which are inherently supplied as a process of creation. You are a person, a man or a woman, and therefore you will live only so long and be required to do certain things if you wish to remain living. Here is the nature and the framework of your life, which will end as it begun, with the body and spirit once more divided to become something new at a later point. The fact that you feel anything at all is a blessing of the spirit being clad in the body. The fact that you experience lusts, wants, and desires is a product of the physical seeking the same. These sensations envelop a person, flooding mind and body with the urge to embrace sensation and become passionate. Because passion is so seated in emotion and the body, it is ultimately about the subjective self, what I want. At the same time, the seductions of the light are also present, albeit far more subtle, but no less impactful. Where the temptations of the flesh will lead one on a journey of personal exploration, the temptations of the spirit lead a person into the world for far more selfless reasons. Usually, a higher ideal is seen and emulated. Temptations of the spirit involve ideas which lead to revolution. Almost always, the sentiment is, it doesn't have to be this way. And the revelation that something different may be had is often sufficient to spark others into acts of self-sacrifice on behalf of those they may never see or meet. As a creator god, Saturn's association with black and darkness is due to its association with the ether. Conceptually, Saturn is the ether that rests in wait for the penetrating influence of spirit, which is light, to drive its wedge amid the darkness and together create the soul of the universe. It is the collision between the irresistible force of spirit against the immovable object that is the ether that gives rise to all we see and experience from moment to moment. Mercy as light reaches forth and says, "Let there be life." And Saturn as agent of severity and justice says, "Yes, there will be life, but there shall also be death." And so the world turns. I hope that this helps clarify things a bit for everyone. As an alchemist, I believe that it is a mistake to shun the utility of darkness, to work only with one hand. To work with only one hand, right or left, light or dark, is to eliminate one's ability to create and to transmute. With one hand, one may only act upon the forces so aligned. This is a result of the principle of polarization. The alchemist does not shun or favor either hand, but uses them both to great power and effect. For this is the way of the universe and the all. Thank you for your great question. This episode of Ask an Alchemist has been possible thanks to the generous contributions of the friends and members of the Modern Alchemist channel on Patreon. Friends and members of the Modern Alchemist channel on Patreon enjoy exclusive content, including articles, videos, and classes. For those wishing to join the friends and members of the Modern Alchemist channel on Patreon, a link has been provided in the description below. I'm Aubrey Forrest, the Modern Alchemist. I'll be talking to you soon.